Hello, Brian, and welcome back to Japan by River Cruise. I'm Bobby Judo.
And I'm Ollie Horn.
And joining us this week for her second journey down the river is Anne Crescini, popular columnist, YouTuber, TV commentator, and lecturer at Kitakyushu University, where there's currently a 3-semester waiting list to take her course on why Japanese river cruises are the best in the world. Anne, thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, good to see you again.
On this week's show, despite a certain amount of effort, yes, 0 is an amount of effort, Japanese schools are still struggling with issues like bullying and a system of conformist draconian rules that adversely affect mixed-race students. Ollie will talk to Anne about her personal experiences as a parent of children in Japanese public schools, while I look up what draconian means right quick. Plus, Ollie's got your weekly river cruise recommendation. Ollie?
Yes, Bobby, this week it's all aboard a River Cruise Hiragana Learning Simulation VR cruise, where each cruise route takes the shape and path of hiragana character stroke orders. I tried Not, which starts off like it's a small route, but actually turns back and goes on for longer than you expect. So, which meanders south in a leisurely way. And Nu, which made me feel violently sick.
And for those of you who are concerned, please don't worry. We will be addressing the issue and giving a formal 20-minute apology for our recommendation last week, which, as you all know, was for an Osaka-based Nazi-themed river cruise. Ollie and I have since done some research into World War II-era Germany, and believe you me, we will never look at the Holocaust the same way again.
I'm fairly confident there are listeners that will not know the story that this relates to and think we've just had a wild one.
All that and more on the way. But first, Soap Talk. Ryan, I bet you thought that we forgot your birthday, but we did not.
No, it's May the 12th.
If you say so.
And thank you for joining us again. It's good to have you back. You were one of the guests that we know in person. You're also based in Fukuoka. We've hung out a couple of times. We've done some work projects together. I've been following you on Twitter, and I've noticed that recently your Twitter presence, you've been a little bit more critical of Japanese social or cultural issues. I'm wondering kind of like what prompted the change.
Yeah, that's a very polite way of saying, what made you so damn angry online?
Well, I still love Japan. I'm crazy about it here, but, you know, I think I was a little bit, I praised it a lot, and I do love it. But I think recently, just having kids here and seeing a lot of the things that, like, I think what triggered it was my time on the PTA and seeing the craziness that goes on in the PTA, and just the overwhelming pressure and unrealistic expectations they have on people here, and that nobody really says anything, even though everybody knows it's crazy. It's just weird, you know, and I think that kind of just triggered a lot of things where I felt a lot of just injustice, and I felt like I just had to do something, you know.
So I'm not a parent to humans, at least. I am to cats. And my friends who are parents say that the worst thing, the absolute worst thing about being a parent of young children is the school WhatsApp group, the PTA WhatsApp group. It is the Japanese line group equivalent, an absolute pit of hell.
Yeah, I think pit of hell is a very kind way to put it, actually. It actually was like, in my life, I've never been so bullied or traumatized in my entire life of 47 years on this earth. It was like hell for me. I mean, especially the group line, you know, Japanese people don't like to talk to each other face to face. They just like to be mean to each other online.
First off, I just want to say that anytime I'm invited to a line group, it just gives me anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, I'm like, no, please don't do that.
It was awful. Like, we would go to meetings and nobody would say anything to my face, and then I would go home and I would go to bed. Next morning, there was like this long sermon waiting for me, like telling me what a horrible, like, irresponsible person I was. And finally, I left the group line because I was so bullied by them. They chased me everywhere, and then they followed me to there was this one guy, especially, he followed me to my personal line and started harassing me there. So there was a lot of nice people too, but it was in general, for me, it was a really bad experience, and I never want to do it again.
Well, so the reason I wanted to bring it up is because you've got a long-running column, you've got a large Japanese following online, and as well as for like your TV appearances and things. And like most of us do when we start out, you kind of build a career around this image of being the foreigner who loves Japan.
Right.
And to have that audience who's joined you for that aspect of your personality, I'm wondering, have you come across any kind of like reactions from your Japanese following to some of the more critical stuff?
Well, sure. Like when I first wrote my PTA blog, one of my friends said to me, "No, everybody likes An-chan that loves Japan. People don't want to hear any criticism from you, so don't put that up." And I was just like, but that's not me. I mean, I can't, I love Japan and I want to live here forever, but I'm not going to praise things that are ridiculous and need to be changed. That's irresponsible. But I think, Baba, you've noticed that, a lot of Japanese people love it when we praise Japan, but they don't want to hear anything negative that we have to say. And so...
Yes. Yeah, I would say I have noticed that.
That has been Bobby's entire bread and butter for the last 15 years.
At the same time, I've gotten an incredible amount of support from most of my fans. Like, most of my fans have been incredibly supportive. But of course, there's been backlash.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make because, and this is something that's come up in the show in multiple different ways over a couple of different episodes, but there's a subset of Japanese people that will latch on to foreigners who like Japan just because they like Japan. And the second they deviate, they turn on them.
And that's like a very small percentage. Like most of the people have been saying things like, thank you for saying stuff that we can't say. Thank you for speaking for the voiceless. Thank you for doing all this. So it's been mostly positive. But there have been some comments like, don't say anything about Japan, you foreigner, kind of thing like that,
Do you have any examples from your clashes with other parents that may have been as a result of you being a foreign parent, or might just be you have a different view of parenting and schooling to them?
I think the thing is when we as foreigners say anything negative, they automatically assume we want Japan to be just like America, and which is not the case. I want Japan not to be crazy, like, and to treat people with respect and to respect their human rights, like.
So it wasn't you suggesting that the school should act more like an American
No,
school?
and in fact, like not the school, but
you didn't want them to implement active shooter drills.
Exactly. like for example, they make comments like
there's not enough school lunch debt in these schools.
they may comment like oh well, in Japan, this is how we do things, or those like little like slight comments,
So tedious, that, isn't it?
Well, that's the point that I would make to Ali, is that I would guess from my experience that there's probably less discrimination. There's less like parents raising an issue because you're a foreigner, and probably more anytime you raise an issue, they deflect it by going, that's because you're a foreigner.
But I mean, almost all the Japanese parents feel the same way I do. They just can't say it. But if they say it, it's just a Japanese with a crazy opinion. If I say it, it's because I'm saying it because I'm a foreigner. You know what I mean? So
right.
Yeah.
And then I got this one line harassment where this guy all of a sudden told me to stop making fun of Japanese people with my behavior on the PTA, and I'm like, where did that come from? So.
And so you chose to instead do it on this podcast.
Yeah, but. Actually, I quit the PTA in the middle. I was one of those rare people that actually just ditched the sinking ship. And people came up to me and they said, wow, you quit the PTA? How did you do that? And I'm like, well, it's a volunteer organization. It's not that hard.
Talking of a sinking ship, our monthly donations have plateaued, which in real terms means they're going down. So if you're the kind of person that listens to this show every single week and thinks, do you know what? Despite the fact that I probably don't have time to listen to the bonus content, despite the fact that I won't benefit from the fact that I get the episode released early, or, more accurately, I don't have faith that Ollie will ever get round to releasing the episodes early, and I don't want discounts on merch. Even if you don't want those perks, if you just want to support the show, then we ask you to convert your donation into a regular monthly subscription.
Let me add on to that by saying we have been seeing regular weekly growth, which means there are a lot of new weekly regular listeners. So if you're a new listener and you've listened to the show more than a couple of times and you enjoy it, you can support it by subscribing monthly at Japan by River Cruise's website or at buymeacoffee.com/Japan by River Cruise.
Yeah, Bobby's put it far more succinctly than I have. If you are listening to the show and you don't give us money, please give us money on a regular basis so we can buy a boat. Do you want to try an even more simplistic version of what I've just summarized?
Cash, please.
And with that, shall we jump into the news? Bobby Judo, what's the deal with all the people that have not paid us money yet? Only joking. What's in the news this week?
Flawless segue. We've seen a handful of tragic stories about suicide. No, we've seen a handful of stories about so-called black schools and their rules this year, as well as recent tragic story about bullying. Both of these areas bring up questions about what a school's stated policies are, how long those policies have been on the books, and how they contrast with what the schools actually do. And the reason we wanted to talk to Anne about this is because I noticed you were tweeting in Japanese about some personal experiences you had with your children's school's rules about hair color. Can you tell us a little bit of background about that?
Yeah, when my daughter entered high school back in April, she had to provide proof that she wasn't dyeing her hair. So they asked her to bring in a picture of before she entered elementary school. And at the time, I just thought it was ridiculous. I'm like, seriously? Like, you got to do that? But she took in the picture of when she was 2. And then a couple months later, I was doing my radio show, and we had a human rights lawyer on, and he was saying how, all these crazy school rules, and he was giving me all these crazy examples. And he said, kids can't raise their voices. They can't speak out because they get punished by the school. So that's the job of adults. Like, they need to speak out. And it really spoke to me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just tweet about how my daughter had to turn in that, the picture. And it was all these people that agreed with me, that it was crazy. And I got 16,000 retweets or something on that one.
Well, there was a famous case that was decided, I think, in February about a school in Osaka that had forced this female student to dye her hair. And she was ethnically Japanese, but they kept making her dye her brown hair black until they actually ended up damaging her hair. And when they took it to court, the court result was that they found that the school was within its rights to enforce the school's policies, but that they had traumatized her and they'd caused her emotional distress. And I think they awarded her something like $3,000, which everybody saw as a very non-committal response to. I mean, they didn't come down either way on whether or not having these rules was acceptable.
So let's talk about these rules then. Because they're obviously so important that they're prepared to piss parents off. I actually was very lucky. When I was 17, I got to spend a couple of weeks in a Japanese school. It's really interesting. But I think a lot of people can't imagine quite how regimented and regulated Japanese school uniform policy is. So, Anne, what's the furthest a student can express their individuality on a school campus?
Well, I think it totally depends to whether they go to a prefectural school, a public school, or a private school. I think all the rules are different, depending on. There's some schools that have no rules at all. But in general, I don't have any problem with wearing uniforms or anything like that. But there's this whole so-called black school rules, black kosoku. Like, for example, they have rules about the position of your ponytail, because if men see the nape of your neck, they get aroused, and so that's bad, right?
We would like to ask you to refrain from discussing the nape of women's necks on the show. Ollie and I will not be able to focus.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Yeah,
you set us off now.
Please forgive my insensitivity. And then they have rules that they actually measure students' socks to make sure they're not too long or too short. I heard one case of a boy who they're not supposed to do anything with their eyebrows. They can't shave their eyebrows or anything. And this guy had a unibrow, right? Where they were growing together. And so he had it just kind of trimmed at the barber shop, and he was called into the teacher's office, and they actually drew his eyebrows with a magic marker.
Even in America, schools have rules they have dress codes, rules about what you can't dress like. And a lot of them are ostensibly to, preserve modesty, or, to keep the kids from being distracted by their hormones. There's all these different reasonings for having them.
And the male teachers as well.
But
sorry, you just got distracted by thinking of the neck.
I was thinking of the nape of someone's neck again. But in the case of the eyebrows, when I was working at schools in Kawasoe in Saga Prefecture, there was a a Yankee fashion trend, Yankee in the sense of kind of like juvenile delinquent Japanese, of completely shaving the eyebrows. And they would take a kid who had completely shaved off his eyebrows and redraw them on. What do you think is the reason for this focus on hair and facial hair?
I think they want to have control of the kids. They want to keep control of them, and they want to make everyone as much as possible the same and learn how to obey rules, because I think they think they're doing it to help them prepare for society. But the rules in the States are generally aimed against vulgarity and like too much, like showing too much skin. A lot of the rules here are aimed at suppressing individuality and making everybody the same, which I think is very dangerous, especially when you deal with like mixed race children who have different kinds of hair colors or different kinds of hairstyle.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because this doesn't seem to be about suppressing someone's right to display their individuality. It's about making them conform to a self that isn't them in the first place. And particularly with mixed race children, these rules are obviously just don't have them in mind, do they?
Well, I think that's the thing. Like, Japanese society in many areas, including school rules, is built on the fact that there's nobody else here but pure Japanese people or whatever, right? And I think, and like for example, my friend who has a mixed race child, she's half black, half Japanese. Her school has outlawed braids because braids are considered a kind of like fashion or whatever, like they're too fashionable. But for black women, braids are actually they keep their hair healthy. They're not just done for show. So for a year and a half, her hair has been damaged because she's not allowed to wear her hair in the 8 to 10 braids that she needs to have her hair in to stay healthy. Stuff like that.
So Noah Oskow, who was a guest on the show a little while back, who is the current admin over at Unseen Japan, he's got a really good write-up over the hair rule issue. And one of the things in his article is about how a lot of these rules were put in place because of an emergence of teenage gangs and school gangs in the 70s and 80s in Japan. And how a lot of those gangs grew in part based on kind of fashion signifiers, hairstyles and other fashion signifiers. And so this was a way of suppressing them. And one of the reasons that Japanese schools even today are kind of reluctant to change these rules is because they're worried about a return to fashion signifiers leading to epidemics of violence.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like a lot of these black school rules, which we should... If you're not familiar with this usage of the word black in Japan, anything that's an immoral practice is referred to as black. There are black companies. There are black kigyo, which means companies.
Part-time jobs.
Black part-time jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth putting a marker in to say potentially problematic?
Oh, extremely problematic. Yeah.
Okay. That's all right then.
But a lot of these rules on the books are often not even practiced anymore these days. Is that right?
Well, there's the official rules that they have in the student handbook, and then there's the unwritten rules that they also have. Like, for example, in my friend's case, there's nothing in the student handbook that says braids are outlawed, but it says wear your hair appropriately for a junior high school student kind of thing. And then when she wore her hair in braids, she was called aside and said that's against the rules.
Well, that's where we start to see a problem, because if it's a rule that's not generally enforced, but it's on the books, and then occasionally it's called up and applied for problematic reasons, be they either for discrimination or for sexual harassment / abuse. There was this huge story that blew up maybe early this year or late last year about the training bras in elementary schools. You guys remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It was a rule about how elementary school students were not allowed to wear bras or training bras. And in a special case where a girl's body had developed early and required the use, the teachers, even if they were male teachers, were in charge of assessing the girl's body and determining whether or not it was to be allowed.
Yeah, reminding ourselves of stories like this, I think frames this discussion differently, doesn't it? Because this isn't just about keeping discipline, and it's not about teaching children to learn the value of abiding by rules, and it's not about keeping order in schools. It's about like busybodiness. It's about schools wildly overreaching and interfering in every aspect of a child's personal development?
Well, there's an argument that that's a cultural difference because in the West, schools are not responsible for the socialization and the moral education in as hands-on a way as they are in in Japan. In Japan, the teacher plays the role of like the third parent. In fact,
I think the concept of loco parentis exists elsewhere, but I'm saying that even the most interventionist of parents wouldn't say, well, for some daft reason, because of our policy, you can't wear the bra you need. Like that policy's not there. Like loco parentis surely means you're thinking about that child as if you were their parent and not taking into account the rest of the world, but what's best for your child's interests. This training bra story tells us that they're not looking at that child's individual best interests, but rather looking at the whole.
I think that too, another difference, I think you can see this a lot in the corona policy, whereas an American would never ask the government, please lock us down because of this infection. The Japanese people are like, please lock us down because you have to protect us. I think there's that whole like, they want to be protected. And I think you can see that in the schools too, because a lot of parents actually ask the schools for stricter rules. They ask the schools, I heard one, please regulate the internet usage because, it's easier if the schools do it or whatever. So it's not just that the schools are terrible. It's that the parents are actually asking. And unfortunately, most parents are completely unaware, or how do you say mukanshin, Bobby? Like they don't have any awareness or interest unless it involves their own kid. They're not aware of a lot of the problems.
Yeah. And that's where I wanted to go with this idea of teachers as responsible for moral education and socialization. Is the parents rely on that too much? They step back and they'll get that at the school. And yeah, I don't know if it's a lack of involvement. I don't know if it's just the way culturally it has been. I think the Japanese approach, the way I see it, tends to be, well, it takes a village to raise a child, and there's a village over there, so I'll let them raise my child.
Yeah, exactly. And and I think that that gives the schools this incredible amount of power and control over the kids. And to me, a lot of what I see and what I hear from other people is it's just bullying. They're just picking on the kids. Drawing a kid's eyebrows with a marker is just bullying. If it's not, you know what I mean? There's no other way to look at it.
Well, I don't want to defend the schools, but it's not only an incredible amount of power, it's also an incredible amount of pressure and responsibility.
Someone's seen Spider-Man?
Exactly.
I remember one thing I remember being surprised by was the fact that like if a kid shoplifts and he's not skipping class, it's not related in any way to school. If a kid who goes to a school shoplifts, the school and the teachers get involved and have to like apologize to the store that he shoplifted from or talk to the police.
But this extends even well into kaisha-in life, because it's very common, I've heard, of someone doing some kind of misdemeanor and your boss going to the police station and having to take some degree of responsibility.
Yep.
You must have heard stories like this, Bobby, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and Japanese teachers are freaking busy. They are so busy. They come home late every night. They work on the weekends. And yet, for some reason, they still have to deal with this annoying PTA business. They have to, like the other day, my daughter was told that her thumbnail on her right hand needed to be trimmed because it was too long. And I'm just like, these teachers are so stinking busy. But yet they still have to tell my daughter that her right thumbnail is too long, so please trim it. It just seems like a lot of wasted time and energy. That doesn't need to be wasted.
So then,
like that.
Why did schools seem to step back and become hands off when it comes to bullying within the schools, student on student bullying?
That's a really good question. That's something I've been thinking about a lot. I don't know if they don't want to, there's a lot of things in Japanese culture where they just don't want to face problems. They don't like any kind of conflict. Maybe they don't want the responsibility. I don't know. What do you think? It's just fascinating how they can be so concerned with my daughter's thumbnail.
Well, she really should have an optimized thumbnail to get the most views.
Nice.
What a Bobby. I have a theory, which I think might be the correct answer, which is like telling your daughter to trim her nails is an easy job, which you can do even when you're really busy. Yep. But stopping your daughter getting bullied is really hard.
Yeah.
And I, I was bullied at my primary school, and the school basically, and looking back, I see like the teachers would have been my age. I wouldn't have had a clue what to do, right? Like, and I'm really smart, and I don't think these teachers were. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just like it's such a difficult problem, and they are under-resourced. Yeah. And also, I think the mentality is it will sort itself out. They're not going to be our problem in a few years.
Right.
Oh, I don't want to bring up the specifics of the story because it's very depressing. But there was a recent suicide that was a result of bullying, and they found out well after the fact. The school's position was that the bullying issue had been resolved, and then they found out after the fact that the students who were involved in the bullying had been like passing around a notebook that was titled "How to Kill So-and-So." And they had suppressed that information and not said anything to the family. And the family's position was like, had we known that it was this bad and this was going on, we could have done something to intervene. And I don't...
Right.
For the responsibility for something like that, you don't, without knowing the situation, you can't say how much the school should have done, how much more involved the parents should have been. You don't know anything. But the fact that the schools seem to have such strict policies stated about how to deal with bullying, but then to step so far back, whether it's to avoid responsibility or avoid suspicion or complicity, I don't know what it is, but it's something that as a parent I find very scary.
It is very scary, and there's a lot of problems in Japanese schools, not just school rules and stuff, but and the bullying. And there's a lot of teacher bullying. There was the case in Kobe a few years ago where the teachers forced another teacher to eat spicy curry or whatever. I don't remember this one, but I don't know if you remember that. But if the kids see that, and they see them bullying each other and they see them bullying other kids, how is bullying ever going to be erased from the Japanese society? So, I just feel like my kids are constantly writing essays about bullying. I feel like all they ever do is write essays about why bullying is bad, and yet it's not just about writing essays. It's about actually acting, moving into action. It's about being a good example to the kids, not just having them write essays all over about it.
And you do wonder if the same amount of effort was expended on creating a culture where bullying's not necessary in order to thrive. Then you just wouldn't have time to worry about these stupid school uniform policies or seating plans or whatever else.
I don't know about you guys. I don't know how it is in England, but I've really seen very little experienced really that much adult bullying in the US, like where people actually bully their coworkers or bully their friends or whatever. Here it's just like I was so bullied on the PTA. I have not been so bullied since I was like in the fourth grade. And I hear stories like that all around me, like adults getting bullied by other adults. And I don't have any memory of that ever happening.
It seems to me that you were bullied as a tool, right? They bullied you because they wanted something, which was to get you the hell out of their hair, to stop you from interfering. And my view is if there was another means by which they could exculpate you and stop making you a bother, they would. But those means of communications don't exist. And so bullying's the most efficient tool to get what you want. And I think the same's true in the playground, right? Like a kid with low self-esteem, the quickest way to get it is to team up with the person that can offer it. And I think the same's true for teachers.
Yeah, it's something that, I don't know, it just seems like it's been an issue in Japanese society for years, and it just doesn't ever seem to get any better, But I do see hope about the school rules. There are a lot of changes, I think, going on. Like my friend as a result of my tweets and a bunch of other issues, is able to wear braids now. Her school backed down and allowed her to wear braids. So, and there are a lot of people. I think Twitter is very effective in Japan because it's the only place where people can, just expel all of their honne, their real feelings. Mm-hmm. And I think that's become a community for social change in Japan. So there is a lot of positive things that I see.
Flip side of that is Twitter is also one of the most effective places to go to bully someone.
Hey, thanks very much for listening to this episode 104 of Japan by River Cruise. Give us some money.
And thank you for joining us. Please give us some money. No,
you got it.
No, sincerely, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I genuinely hope that all of our kids grow up okay. And if our listeners would like to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Well, please check out my YouTube channel called Anjan no Kotoba Cafe. I put up a video every week, and actually I'm going to put up a live video from Tokyo this week or next week, so please check that out. And yeah, I do a bilingual blog and pretty much every social media out there, so yeah, check me out.
We'll link everything up in the notes, and thanks again. We will see you next week.